Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a kind of insane all-core overclock that I managed to get on the 13600K with the E-cores disabled because, yes, there's more E-cores than ever now, but they still suck, so I've turned them off, and that'll be that. Anyway, as you can see, the overclock in question is 5.6 gigahertz on all of the P-cores, and it ran 100 loops of Linpack. This is 5,500 seconds of Linpack runtime, and it passed. Yeah, which is like that's just insane, right? Like that is 5.6 gigahertz on 6P cores. It's Linpack stable. This is basically the level of stability that I like test to for my personal daily system, at least on the CPU side of things. There is a memory overclock on this setup right now, and that's not dialed in, and I've not stress tested it. It might be stable because I didn't really punch in anything very aggressive, but yeah, this isn't finished. But like the overall, like the whole setup is not finished, but the CPU side of it, yeah, I'd say that's pretty done. So yeah, and that's 5.6. So 5.6 gigahertz all core. So let's quickly take a look at the setup here. So of course, I'm running a Intel Core i5-13600K, which was provided by Intel, so big thank you to them for the CPU. It's cooled by an EVGA CLC280, and there's just conventional thermal paste on top of the IHS. There's no liquid metal anywhere in the system, which makes it even more ridiculous that we can run these kinds of speeds, because this 280 AIO, like, this is not the peak of cooling that you can get for an LGA 1700 CPU. Like, if you built a proper custom loop and then ran, liquid metal on top of the IHS, or even delidded the CPU and then put liquid metal under the IHS and on top of the IHS, because the thing is the solder thermal interface material is relatively thick. So by reducing the layer thickness between the between the CPU die and the IHS, by switching from solder to liquid metal, you can actually get another temperature improvement. And then because Intel 13th gen, 12th gen, they're all very high thermal density, it actually benefits to put liquid metal even on top of the IHS. So basically, if you built a great big liquid metal sandwich and a custom loop, or you could even go as far as going to direct die, you could get even lower temperatures. And instead of, showing, instead of 5.6 gigahertz all core, it might be possible to do 5.7, which would be absolutely insane. So yeah, like, this, in my opinion, is like normie cooling right here. And we're doing 5.6 gigahertz all core, which is just, like, that's absolutely insane. I kind of suspect that this 13600K might be in the upper percentages of 13600Ks ever created. But even then, I'd be very surprised if, like, most 13600Ks didn't do at least 5.4. So yeah, that's kind of ridiculous. The motherboard is a Gigabyte Z790 AORS Master provided by Gigabyte, so big thank you to them for the board. And Gigabyte also sent along two 16GB Hynix, SK Hynix 16 gigabit A-die memory sticks. So they're single rank DIMMs. They have a 7200 CL34 XMP. That's not currently running the XMP because I was trying to set up something at like 7400 or higher memory clocks, but yeah, that wasn't going quite as easily as I wanted it to go, and so I gave up on that because my priority really was, like, I just want to see, like, what can we run with the CPU for Linpack stability. And the 13600K being a 6-core doesn't need quite so much memory bandwidth as, like, the 8-core CPUs do, because DDR5 has tons of memory bandwidth. So yeah, like one of the concerns with using Linpack as a stress test is if your memory settings suck, then Linpack is actually very easy to run. So that's the main reason why I threw together like a quick and messy memory overclock, because you can't really use Linpack as a proper stress test if you're on stock memory settings. It's not, like, with DDR5, it's not as much of a problem as on DDR4. Like, on DDR4, Linpack is incredibly memory bottlenecked, but even with DDR5, you don't really want to be running it at XMP, because it'll be pretty heavily memory bottlenecked. So anyway, yeah, so that's the setup. It's just like, Yeah. Also, I no fans sitting on top of the motherboard or anything. I know there's one laying on the desk. That's the fan I usually use for like memory cooling or VRM cooling or whatever cooling. But in this scenario, didn't need it. Um, and yeah, and it just kind of like it does Linpack, 100 loops of Linpack. Um, I was also considering running the Y Cruncher component stress test, which I did test with a slightly different CPU configuration at similar frequencies. Um, but anyway, so while running Linpack, the CPU temperature maxed out at 102 degrees Celsius, which is fine because we're just stress testing. Like, if I run Cinebench right now, right, you'll see that the CPU temperatures are much more acceptable because Linpack is insanely heavy. So right, like Cinebench on this will probably top out in like under 95 degrees Celsius. So I'm really not concerned about the operating temperature of the CPU when running Linpack. The 102 degrees Celsius, that's fine for just stress testing. If you were actually like running a like render system or something where you were consistently hitting, Linpack levels of CPU stress, then I wouldn't consider the 102 degrees Celsius to be fine. You would need to do something about that. Like you probably just couldn't sustain such a high overclock. But yeah, just for like stability stress testing with Linpack, yeah, like that's a perfectly acceptable temperature in my opinion. Um, Also, this Cinebench score, like this is a very high Cinebench score already, but we're just going to quickly rerun that with high priority because the thing is when you're running a bunch of monitoring utilities and have a bunch of stuff open in general, it tends to drag down your benchmark scores a bit. So now we're going to run that with high priority just to show you what happens when you're not, slowing down the application by having a bunch of garbage running. Um, and I will also show you what happens if I turn the E-cores back on, because it doesn't really make the score that much higher. Like, it does improve the score, but it's not, in my opinion, like, especially if you're doing just, like, a gaming build or something where you really don't need, like, 14 cores, I'd leave the E-cores turned off, personally. Like, if I was building, like, the funny thing is, so my daily system has a 3950X in it, with the SMT disabled because I don't, like, need that much multi-threaded performance. Like, there's a certain level of multi-threaded performance that I want from my personal system because I do use the CPU for video encoding. But I don't need that much multi-threaded performance. Like, I don't need so much multi-threaded performance that, having SMT on really makes a difference that I care about. It doesn't. And so I have SMT turned off because of the, like, thermal density benefits, that kind of thing. And my personal system is like 7,500 points in Cinebench off the top of my head. It's a little over 7,000. Actually, it might not even be over 7,000. It's a 3950X. It's pretty old. It's pretty slow. And so this 13600K is like approaching the territory of my personal system at this point. Like, I honestly wouldn't be too like if I was actually building a daily system, like if I upgraded my personal system to a 13600K right now, I would probably just turn the E-cores off and never look back. Because that's kind of the thing is like if whatever you're doing only scales to 4 threads, having 8 more E-cores doesn't matter. Like, at all. They just don't do anything. If what you're doing only scales to 6 cores, right? Again, having a bunch of extra E-cores doesn't do anything. And the thing is, like, this CPU just, like, this is 6 P-cores producing 6,800 points in Cinebench. Like, this is absolutely insane multi-core performance, considering that this is currently running as just a 6-core CPU. Like, for comparison, okay, we're going to take a look at some other Cinebench scores out there. So here we have the hardware bot, Ryzen 7 5800X rankings. Basically, if you're on like water cooling, 6,785 points is like the highest score anybody's managed on like ambient cooling, right? Here we have I'm going to assume like water cooled system. Oh, hardware bot's being slow today again. Oh, well, I guess we're not going to take a look at that. But yeah, basically, you need like a 5 gigahertz 5800X to match the performance of a 6-core 13600K. Like that is insane. Because I think we can all agree, like the 5800X is not a slow CPU, right? It's a high core count, last gen CPU. Of course, like to most people, it's a fast chip, right? I don't think anybody would really complain about having a 5800X in their daily system. And then like you wouldn't be able to run it at 5 gigahertz 24/7. It wouldn't, like there's no, like the thing is, this is, hardware bought cinebench rankings. This ranking doesn't have a requirement for stability. None of these chips are likely to be able to run Linpack at all with the settings that they are running at in this ranking, right? So that's kind of the thing, is like I have a 13600K here that can run Linpack pretty much indefinitely, and it outscores a 5800, like a 5800X in Cinebench. And the 5800X is an 8-core CPU, so the P-cores are better than ever, right? Because the thing is, Intel hasn't actually increased the IPC of the P-cores in the 13th gen CPU pretty much at all. They've just added some extra L2 cache, some extra L3 cache. And that does help a bit, but it's not actually a direct like IPC uplift. But the main thing they've done with 13th gen is like it just clocks so much higher. And so you have the insane IPC of the P-cores combined with just ridiculous clock speeds at this point. And the end result is like, yeah, a 6-core CPU can just outperform a last gen 8 core in freaking Cinebench. Like one of the most multi-threaded benchmarks ever in terms of like how well it scales with core count. Another comparison point, 7600X rankings, not super competitive. The 7600X is not a very interesting overclocking CPU, and I think we can all see why. It just doesn't really compete with a 13600K, or really even the 12600K when it comes to Cinebench score. Well, I mean, a 12600K, you need like sub-ambient cooling to hit these kinds of points, but yeah, like this doesn't compete with a 13600K. Then we have the 11900K, admittedly 2-generation old 8-core CPU. That also is like, it's just, like these are water-cooled CPUs, 5.3 gigahertz. Like, you're not dailying this. You're not dailying a 5.3 gigahertz 11900K because it's like, well, if you're doing the same stress testing standards that I'm doing here, like 5.3 gigahertz 11900K, you're not running Linpack on that unless you're like intentionally sandbagging your memory performance. So yeah, like they're 6-core, 6-core CPU, faster than 8-core CPU from 2 generations ago. Then we have the 10900K, which, when this came out, this was like the multitasking monster CPU, right? 10-core CPU, huge single-core performance at the time. Yeah, that also doesn't go really above 7,000 points in Cinebench unless you start putting it on like serious sub-ambient cooling, and hardware bot is being incredibly slow again. Yeah, like, chilled water cooling, you can get like 7,000 points. We're looking at like 5.4 gigahertz. Like, you're not dailying those kinds of clocks. So yeah, the 13600K, at least the one I have here, is absolutely just ridiculous. Like, it is so freaking fast with just 6 cores. Like, I've been a huge fan of the P-cores ever since 12th gen, but now that they do, like, this is basically like my 12600KF, which is a really good 12600KF. If I could actually just find benchmarks for it. Actually, let's just go all. And yeah, there's my 12600KF. Right? Like, that's top 10 for Cinebench and on LN2, and yeah, the 13600K is already making it very irrelevant, unfortunately for me. But like, before the 13600K was a thing, like, I was in the top like 5 for 6-core Cinebench scores. Mind you, I didn't, like, I still don't think that's, like, I don't think I ever maxed that at 12600KF out completely, because the LN2 pot that I have for it is kind of not, like, the LN2 pot that I used is just not that great. But At the same time, I don't think it would have gone significantly faster. Like, I think 6.8 might have been possible with somewhat better cooling or better setup or just more time put into tuning the chip. But anyway, like, my 12600KF is good. That chip maxed out at, like, for Linpack, would max out at, like, 5.152 on ambient cooling. And yeah, and now we have, like, 400 megahertz more core clock than what my 12600K could do. And I'm honestly kind of suspicious that my 13600K might be like top 10% or something, because like Intel ships these with a max turbo boost of 5.1 gigahertz, which just seems like why would you leave this much headroom on the table, right? Like the most modern CPUs, like they come out with no overclocking headroom over at all, and this has like 10%. Actually, it's more than 10% because this is single core boost, right? I'm going 5.6 all core Linpack stable. Like, incidentally, the CPU will automatically downclock for Linpack on its own. Like, there's like a permanent AVX offset, which is really annoying, which is actually why if you look at the way that I have this set up right now, you might notice that I have like this huge BCLK overclock going with just 50 CPU ratio, and that's because Gigabyte doesn't have a workaround for the fact that, like, for some reason with 12th gen CPUs, Intel introduce, like, it's not even an AVX offset, it's like an AVX limiter, where if you hit a really heavy AVX2 workload, it'll just drop the CPU to like, it depends on the CPU, but like a 12900K will just drop to 5.1 gigahertz. And there's nothing you can do about that. Well, some motherboards have a workaround for it, but on a lot of boards, like, it'll just drop to 5.1 gigahertz and you're just kind of stuck there because I don't know. Like, I have no idea why Intel thought that was a good idea, but that's a thing on modern, like, Intel CPUs. Luckily, if you have a K CPU, the BCLK is completely decoupled from the rest of the system. It doesn't affect your SATA ports. It doesn't affect your PCIe. It doesn't affect your USB ports. It doesn't affect anything except for the core, the ring, and the memory. So you can just BCLK overclock past the, like, AVX clock speed limiter, which is what I'm doing here. Yeah, like, this, like, there's so much headroom, just like so much overclocking headroom, right? And this is like about it, like, this is not a very refined overclock. This is just 5.6 gigahertz all core and just go for it. There's maybe, and like I said, better cooling. We could probably go even further with this CPU. Arguably, if you really wanted to spend time on it, you could also set up something where it's like single core boost. You know, you could have like single core, like a higher ratio for single core, dual core, triple core, quad core, pentacore, 6-core load. Personally, I wouldn't really bother with that because the thing is, you generally don't have, like, there's not really. I guess maybe you'd be able to do, like, this chip might be able to do like 6 gigahertz single core boost, maybe. It would be like, the thing about that is it's a pain to stress test, and especially single core boost is one of those things where it's like, it sounds really good on paper until you realize that it only ever, like, single core boost is only ever active if you have literally one thread using one core. So under most circumstances, the CPU does not use the single core boost basically at all. It's like one of those things that, yeah, it'll show up in monitoring software that your CPU occasionally hit whatever single core frequency it's rated at. Practically speaking, when doing most workloads, it is never going to be at a single core boost. That does mean you could just tune dual core and triple core instead, which would potentially be more useful, but dual core and triple core aren't going to necessarily be, you know, that much faster than the 5.6 all core, though I've not looked into that yet. But like, I've tried messing around with like per core overclock, like the like load based overclocking on the 12900K, and it was very frustrating because I couldn't get the CPU to consistently hold the boost clock in stress tests. So it's like I'd load up a 4-thread stress test and the CPU was not running the 4-thread ratio. It was running the like 5-thread ratio, and it's just like, that's not very fun to deal with. But anyway, you know, so there's more headroom for further tuning if you want to spend entirely too much time on it. But like this result already is just insane. Like, this is 5.6 gigahertz all core. and it's Linpack stable. It performs like a last gen 8-core CPU in freaking multi-threaded workloads like Cinebench, ignoring the 12th gen because, yeah. I am kind of cheating by saying last gen 8-core CPU and referring to the 5800X. In the grand scheme of modern 8-core CPUs, the 5800X is quite slow, especially compared to like a 12700K or 12900K if you disable the E-cores. So yeah, like I'm as far as I'm concerned, if Intel never put another E-core on another CPU, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Sure, Intel wouldn't be able to compete with AMD on Cinebench, like all core Cinebench rankings. I don't care. I don't run a render farm. I don't need like tens of thousands of points in Cinebench. Well, you're not getting tens of thousands of points, but like I don't need over 10,000 points in Cinebench. So yeah, like I wouldn't mind if Intel ditched the E-cores and made the CPUs cheaper because the E-cores do still take up die area, or if they just put more P-cores instead. But anyway, let's take a look at what happens if I turn the E-cores back on. Because Intel did go ahead and improve the whole, like, it used to be that if you turned the E-cores, your, like, ring clock went straight to hell. That's no longer a thing, which is pretty neat. The E-cores also tend to clock a little bit higher. The thing is, especially if you're on Windows 10, they cause a bunch of like scheduling issues. If you're on Windows 11, they cause fewer scheduling issues. But even if you're on Windows 10, the E-cores do help Cinebench a ton. And so a ton. I think we'll see like over 10,000 Cinebench once I turn the E-cores back on. And I do have the E-cores overclocked because I was messing around with them, and then I was like, you know what? And like the thing is, like I turned them off, and I noticed that the Cinebench score didn't really change that much, and I was like, well, okay, I don't actually need the E-cores anyway. So also in other news, like the 13th gen memory controller is way better than the 12th gen memory controller. I was able to get the like a 4x16 setup of Hynix MDI to boot at like 6600. Obviously, it's not, that's not proof of stability, but for comparison on Z690 trying to boot, or well, with my say 12600K or my 12900K, booting like 6000 or well 6200 is difficult on 4x16. So there's like, for 4x16, there's like a 400 megabits per second memory speed improvement. Then for single rank, I mean, I had the MDI sticks booting 7200 on the Z790 Master. Right, this is a 4-DIMM daisy chain motherboard, and the 13600K can just boot 7200 on Hynix MDI, which is not like a high clocking memory chip like ADI is. So yeah, anyway, let's turn the E-cores back on. And actually, while we're here, I'm going to take you through the settings. So we're first going to go through the settings and then worry about the E-cores. So yeah, 5 gigahertz ratio because there's the AVX limiter. If I punch in 5.1, Linpack will still run at 50x. I mean, if I punch in 51, it'll still drop down to 50 for Linpack. So 550... 112 BCLK, there's no stability. Like, yeah, you need to, account for what it does to your memory clock, what it does to your ring clock, but there's no inherent stability issues with raising BCLK on 12th gen or 13th gen CPUs, or 10th gen for that matter, or 11th gen. Like Intel, I think they did this with Skylake. They basically completely decoupled the BCLK from the rest of the platform. So as a sort of extra goodie for overclockers. They also disable that on non-K CPUs. So yeah, yeah, so you can just kind of use that to work around the sort of AVX limiter that a lot of modern Intel CPUs have. The memory is set to 6400, which it's 64 times 112, so the memory ends up at 7168. Or yeah, 7168. I'm on fixed V-core with 1.435 volts, which sounds rather high, but it's actually not because I'm running low LLC, so there's plenty of V-droop. When we're running Linpack, the voltage is way below 1.435 volts. It's actually probably below 1.3 volts, just based on the temperature that it's running at. Actually, it might be around 1.3. I'm not sure. The thing is, I don't currently have DyeSense voltage readings on the motherboard, so I don't know what the real core voltage is while Linpack is running. But yeah, with low LLC, the voltage regulation is actually really good. Just based on some oscilloscope measurements that I was like, well, I did a lot of the tuning with the oscilloscope hooked up, so I could watch the voltage regulation. And yeah, on low LLC, the voltage regulation is very good. In fact, I think this board has better voltage regulation than Gigabyte's Z690 boards, but I'd have to do like proper A/B testing because I tested all the Z690 boards with the 12900K, and so it's like, no, I need to test with the 12900K again, or it's not comparable data. But yeah, low LLC might not even be necessary, but I'm also cooling maxed out right now. And 1.435 idle is fine. Like even 1.45 volts idle would be completely fine. So basically right now we're not looking, like I'm not voltage limited here. It's just, I don't really want the CPU hitting 107 degrees or something, right? 102 is like it's not very comfortable in my opinion. So, yeah, anyway, core voltage protection maxed out, vCore current protection maxed out as well. I don't think that's really necessary for the 6 core. I have the core PLL bumped by 150 millivolts. This is perfectly safe for like long-term use, and it can help stabilizing high core frequencies. So that's why I have that raised a bit. Then memory-wise, VCCSA at 1.2, 2 volts on VCC in. This is perfectly safe for the CPU. Helps with memory stability. Can help with memory stability. A lot of the time you won't really, like, I've not tested this too much, but sometimes 2 volts VCC in gives you slightly better stability than like 1.8, so yeah, and there's no harm in raising it, so it's not like it even really increases the CPU's power consumption because the VCC in voltage goes to a internal voltage regulator that then regulates that voltage down into your internal VCCSA and VDDQ CPU, VDD2 CPU is an external voltage regulator, so that's something else. But yeah. Also, speaking of which, Gigabyte has cleaned up the BIOS on their Z790 boards. Like, we don't have that awkward VDDQ/DRAM setting anymore. We just have a dedicated VDDQ CPU voltage. So that's nice. Thank you, Gigabyte, for cleaning up the BIOS. This is a lot better than it used to be. It's much less of a mess. Memory is just set to 1.4 volts. Like I said, the memory is not dialed in. It's just something so that Linpack isn't as memory bottlenecked as it tends to be, though, with a 6-core CPU. I'm not sure how memory bottlenecked it is right now. I've disabled fast boot because, especially if you're doing the BCLK overclocking, the board gets weird about not, like the board won't realize that you've like significantly changed the memory speed, and it will try to fast boot, which is really bad because fast boot skips memory training. And so if you just increase your memory speed by 10%, your memory controller just very upset about that. Very, very upset about that. So if you're going to be doing like a bunch of BCLK tuning or really any memory tuning, you should disable fast boot until you're finished with your memory tuning, and then you can turn fast boot back on. Anyway, other than that, for the actual memory timings, we're at 3640, 646. This is literally worse than the XMP profile of this memory kit because I was hoping to hit higher memory speeds than 7200, but then stability wasn't working out, and so I kind of gave up on that. I didn't fix I didn't lower the primary timings though, so yeah, the primary timings are not ideal. The main thing for getting Linpack to run fast, though, is the TRRDs, which are at 4.8. It looks like Hynix ADI actually has a really weak TRRD-L, which is interesting. Then TFall's at 16, which literally doesn't go any lower. Command rates on auto. TREFI is at 100,000. So, yeah, TXP's at 4. Then the power down enable timings are all just 2, 4, 4 because they don't really matter. TRD pre at 12. I'm not sure if that could go lower, but yeah, it's at 12. TWR pre's at 80 because, again, like the timings aren't minimized. Like 80 is like, that works on Micron, it works on Samsung, so I was like, what are the chances that it won't work on this Hynix kit? And it's stable enough for Linpack so far. TCK is at 4. And then for the back-to-back timings, these are also not dialed, like nothing is dialed in. This is literally just like, I want Linpack to be very slightly less memory bottlenecked, please. 14, 6, and everything else is on auto because I didn't want to spend time dialing in timings that are like difficult to deal with. Also, right to right, for whatever reason, on DDR5 has like a crazy high stock timing. Like you can see it over here in this column, 36. Like it actually just goes to something like 36, which is insane. So yeah. Um, Anyway, so that's the timing setup. Very much not finished. It is worth noting that a lot of the timings that you see, especially in Gigabyte's BIOS, aren't actually real. Like, Intel CPUs do not have a TRC register. It's just straight up not a thing on Intel CPUs. TWR also doesn't exist on Intel CPUs. It does exist on the actual memory stick, but Intel CPUs do not have a TWR register. Then the WTR, like write to read timings, Intel doesn't have registers for those either. These three right here, same thing, those don't exist. TRFC doesn't work on DDR5. TRFC2 does work, but I don't know what to set it to because new memory chip and I didn't want to deal with refresh cycle instability. Refresh cycle per bank is real. RTP isn't. Intel doesn't have an RTP register, they have an RD pre-register, which is this timing down here. Anyway, I really shouldn't be going through all of the BIOS settings. I said I'd show you the what happens when you turn on the E-cores for Cinebench. But one other thing I do want to point out is that Gigabyte has added all of the memory training options now to even like their consumer BIOS, which is cool because with this, there's this setting right here, and that should improve your round-trip latency timings. On some CPUs that have terrible memory controllers, especially 12th gen, like my 12900K, I turned that setting on, it doesn't work anymore. So that setting is like, it can reduce your memory latency a bit, but also depending on your CPU, it can just tank memory stability. So that one is one of those settings. Like, it's available on, like, MSI had it available forever, Asus had it available forever, Gigabyte had it hidden for a while, and now they've exposed it along with basically all of the other memory training options. So, yeah, with Z790, like, Gigabyte's BIOS is, like, a lot better than it used to be. It's still a... I'd say it's a lot... It's still a bit heavy on the submenus, but it's a lot better than it used to be, in my opinion. So anyway, let's go through the CPU settings. So 110-degree thermal limit. This is just for stress testing. If I was actually dealing with the CPU, I'd back this down to 100 degrees, which I think is the default temperature limit. Hyper-threading on, speed shift on for some reason. I normally disable that. Evidently, I forgot to disable that. Yeah, oh wait, no, I think what happened is I went auto and then, yeah, okay, well, I would normally disable that because this is a static 5.6 gigahertz all-core, so we don't need speed shift, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter, so screw it. Then ring to core offset is disabled, CPU ESD disabled, race to halt disabled, energy efficient turbo disabled, turbo boost disabled. Don't disable your turbo boost on non-Gigabyte motherboards. That'll disable your ability to overclock the CPU. For some reason, Gigabyte motherboards let you change the ratio even if you disable turbo boost. They're not, like, it's not supposed to work that way, but Gigabyte BIOS things. Anyway, then I have TVB disabled, voltage reduction disabled, all of the current excursion protections disabled, and then all of this over here is just auto. Yeah, all of this is just default, I think. Yeah, that's just default. Oops. And if we keep scrolling down, so you'll see that, like, I have the AVX offset set to 0, but it's not, like, the problem with running Linpack on 12th gen, 13th gen CPU is not that there's an AVX offset, it's just like an AVX limiter. If you hit a heavy AVX workload, it just drops to 5, the 13600K just drops to 5 gigahertz, which is very annoying. But also because the BCLK doesn't affect the stability of the rest of the platform, it really isn't that much of an issue to just work around it with BCLK overclocking. C-state's disabled, and then I have all of the power limits just maxed out. So we're going to turn the E-cores back on and see what they do to Cinebench. Off the top of my head, I think they add about 30 or... Well, we'll see. I think we should see about 10,000 points, maybe a bit more than 10,000 points in Cinebench. The annoying thing with the E-cores is they'll actually, like, screw up a bench... Like, they'll screw up something like Linpack. Also, like, they cause scheduling issues, especially on Windows 10. They cause a lot of scheduling issues. So if you don't like Windows 11 and you do want, like, here's the thing. Don't think the eCores being a janky solution to Intel's Cinebench woes are like, I don't think that's a good reason to not get a 13th gen. Right? Because, like, your alternative to the 13600K is like a 7600X, which just has weaker cores and 6 of them. And your alternative to like a 13600K is a 7700X, which is the same thing of like, but that's just an 8 core without the E cores. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm kind of interested to see how this works out. So, previous top score was like 6,828 points. Oh, did it crash? Oh, no, I think because it's on high priority. No, it didn't crash. Oh, it did crash. Oh, the voltage is probably too low now. Yeah, so the thing about the E-cores is they do pull down the core voltage. So, all right, we'll try run that again. But I think they really did just pull the core voltage way low. Because they pull a lot of power. Yeah, I think they're just pulling the core voltage down. Well, that's annoying. Yeah, so you can't like stress test without the E-cores and then turn them back on because this'll happen. Because the thing is, like, they really aren't very efficient. They just don't take up very much space. So Intel's just kind of like, oh, well, instead of adding like 2 more P-cores, we're going to shove 8 more E-cores into the CPU. And it's like, okay, well, great and all. So the way we fix this is we just raise the LLC. Because basically the issue is that with the E-cores running, it's pulling way more, like the CPU pulls way more current, and that's crashing Cinebench. And like, because I have a really droopy load line with the low LLC, it's pulling the voltage too low. So yeah, if you like, you can't tune without the E-cores turned on and then turn them back on again and be like, oh, everything will be fine. It won't be. It very much won't be fine because you'll hit some like, because like Cinebench isn't even that heavy, and you can already see that like Cinebench is freaking crashing because I turned the E-cores on. They also add heat, so if you're like radiator limited, like your cooling system just doesn't have that much radiator, turning the E-cores back on will just increase the total amount of heat output that the CPU has. So yeah, like the E-cores, like if your regular workloads are something like Cinebench or video encoding and like you'd need a lot of cores, then yes, the E-cores make sense if you need a lot of cores. If you just want peak like single-threaded performance, the E-cores kind of suck. They really get in the way. And we get 10,258 points. So let's do the math on how useful those E-cores actually are. So without the E-cores, I was getting 6,800-ish points. Now we're getting 10,252 points. So 10,252 points divided by 6,800 points. So yeah, like you get 50% more multi-threaded performance, but the thing is, if your workload doesn't scale past 6 cores, you get 0% more performance. So it really depends on what you're doing. So 13th gen to me is kind of like I just like the P cores. I still don't care about the E cores. They're not worth the effort and the inconvenience, and they're not worth running Windows 11 in my opinion. Like, I am not switching my operating system for a CPU. That's dumb. But yeah, like if you need multi-threaded performance, the E-cores make sense. If you don't, you can just kind of ignore them. or more like you can just kind of turn them off and put all your attention into maxing out the P-cores. And for, like, and because the P-cores are so ridiculously fast, like, like, you're still just going to have a ton of multi-threaded anyway. So, yeah, and obviously if you have a CPU like a 13700K or the higher core count chip, well, okay, no, the 13900K has 16 freaking E-cores on it, so, percentage-wise, I think it's even more imbalanced than the 13600K, because this is 6 to 8, whereas the 13900K has... Yeah, the 13900K has only like 30% more P cores, but 100% more E cores. So basically, if you're like me and you hate the E cores, the best CPU is the 13700K. And I'm very seriously considering picking one up just to see like what kind of luck I get with the Silicon Lottery on that and how it compares to the 13900K. Because I do have a 13900K from Intel, and it doesn't really clock any higher than my 13600K does, which is why I'm kind of suspicious that this 13600K might be like a really, really, really good chip. Because yeah, 5.6 gigahertz all-core Linpack stable is insane. Like it is absolutely ridiculous. Like this is so freaking fast. And yeah, and if you do care about Cinebench, you can turn the E-cores back on and like. You'll need to figure out like a different way to stress test everything, because Linpack just straight up does not work if you have the E-cores turned on, as far as I know, on any operating system, because it's so very memory intensive. So I think you're basically going to have to stress test with like Prime 95 at that point. And yeah, like that's kind of that. But hey, if you're doing like full like rendering workloads to that extent, then I would actually recommend Prime 95 as a stress test anyway, because Linpack is very heavy, but Prime 95 is heavier. Slightly. Like, usually the difference between, like, Linpack stability and Prime 95 stability is, like, 100 megahertz, assuming that you don't run... Because Linpack doesn't have quite the same sustained power consumption that Prime 95 has. So Prime 95 is a lot more cooling limited than Linpack would be. It also pulls more current, so your voltage tends to end up a lot lower. Yeah, as like if you have a more lighter daily use case, Linpack, in my opinion, is a really good, like, I use Linpack as my daily stress test. Like, my daily system straight up cannot run Prime 95 indefinitely. It lasts a couple seconds before it, like, starts dropping workers. It doesn't insta-crash, because I think if your system insta-crashes, that is concerning from the perspective of, like, if something causes the system to crash, you won't know why it happened, because it'll just be instantly down. Yeah, like, I don't require my personal system to be Prime 95 stable. I think off the top of my head, I think I ran just 100 loops of Linpack and then, like, memory stress test on my daily system. So, yeah. Anyway, like 13th gen, especially the 13600K, just seems to have an absolute ton of overclocking headroom. Because even if my chip here is like anomalously good, 5.4 on a CPU that has like a 5.4 all core instead of 5.6 all core on a CPU that's rated for 5.1 turbo boost, like that's still a lot of headroom. Like that's more headroom than we had on the 12600Ks, which are rated for like 4.9 turbo boost. And, a lot of them won't even do 5.1 all core, not Linpack stable anyway. So yeah, like 13th gen is like, if you just need a ton of single threaded performance and also a better memory system, right? Like the memory is not dialed in, but like we'll cover that in the future. Unfortunately, memory tuning takes a ton of effort, like ton of time and effort. Yeah, like the clock speed, it's just so damn high. And especially and the other thing is when you turn off the E-cores, the CPU just pulls less power. It's easier to cool them. That's the other reason I don't like the E-cores, is like if you're stress testing they actively harm the max P-core clock because they add heat to the system. Sure, the E-cores themselves don't run at a very high temperature because they're low thermal density, but your cooling system has to still deal with their heat output, so, you know, that's a thing that you can't just ignore. Um, but yeah, um, like 13th gen is really cool for overclocking. I mean, I guess maybe the 13700K and 13900K probably won't have as much. Well, my 13900K definitely doesn't have this much headroom. And actually, what's kind of crazy, I managed to get this 13600K to do 5.6 gigahertz for Cinebench on air cooling. It was very hot. It wasn't very stable, but it did do it. Which, yeah, like, I love 13th gen. Like, as an overclocker, this is the most exciting CPU. Like, this 13600K is like the most exciting CPU I've had in my hands in a very long time. Um, yeah. I think it's almost kind of comparable to like Haswell in terms of overclocking headroom, because Haswell didn't, or Devil's Canyon, because Haswell didn't really generally clock super duper high, especially if you were stress testing with something like Linpack. It just didn't clock that high. Um, so yeah, anyway, that's it for the video. So thank you to, Gigabyte for the motherboard and the memory kit. Thank you to Intel for the CPU. And that's it. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, hoodies, posters, the usual YouTuber merch. I also have a Bandcamp. There's a link to that down in the description below. And that's it for the video. So thank you for watching and goodbye.